Welcome to the City Club Forum. I'm Jim Lipscomb, president of the City Club. In our forums this month related to the Reagan's administration new economic programs, we are very pleased to welcome as our speaker today Congressman Walter E. Fauntroy, chairman of the Congressional Black Caucus, which is on record as opposing the proposed budget cuts in human services, and has offered its own budget proposal as an alternative to President Reagan's. Congressman Fauntroy has represented the citizens of our nation's capital in the U.S. House of Representatives since 1971, when he was the first person elected delegate to the House from the District of Columbia in 100 years. A native of Washington, D.C., Mr. Fauntroy was educated at Virginia Union University, where he graduated cum laude in 1955, and at Yale University Divinity School, where he earned his Bachelor of Divinity degree in 1958. He began his public career in 1959 as pastor of the church of his childhood, the New Bethel Baptist Church, which he continues to serve as pastor. Congressman Fauntroy brings to his present position a background as a civil rights activist. It was Dr. Martin Luther King who appointed him head of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference's Washington Bureau during the 1960s. He was then national director of the Poor People's Campaign in 1969. In the 95th Congress, he was a member of the House Select Committee on Assassinations and currently is a member of the House Banking, Finance, and Urban Affairs Committee. We are indeed fortunate at the City Club Forum today and are honored to welcome to our podium Congressman Fauntroy.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Lipscomb. And ladies and gentlemen, it's a real pleasure for me to have the opportunity to address the Cleveland City Club, a very distinguished forum, which, as you know, is known not only nationally but internationally. As I come, I bring you greetings from the Congressional Black Caucus in Washington, 16 black men and 2 beautiful black women who together on Capitol Hill seek to move this nation to the high grounds of principles that we enunciate, but so often fail to live. 16 black men and 2 beautiful black women who together on Capitol Hill seek to focus the attention of the nation on dealing with the basic problems confronting our country, problems that just happen to be reflected most acutely in the black experience. As you know, most of the people who are unemployed today and who are among the 1,100,000 who will be unemployed if the Reagan budget cuts go through, the majority of those persons are white. But because blacks are disproportionately represented among the unemployed of the country, with generally twice the unemployment rate of the nation, unemployment is reflected most acutely in our experience. Most of the people in the nation who cannot find decent, affordable housing are white. But because black Americans are disproportionately represented among the ill-housed, our problems in housing reflect themselves most acutely in the black experience. Most of the people who require adequate health care and quality education in the public schools of our nation are white. It just happens that those experiences reflect themselves most painfully in that of black Americans. And so we in the Congressional Black Caucus seek to address those basic problems of the nation that simply reflect themselves most acutely in the black experience. We have 18 members of that caucus who, after 10 years of association together on Capitol Hill, are no longer an aggregation of former civil rights activists, but now seasoned and responsible members of the Congress in key legislative positions. We can boast among our members now of the the chairman of the House Administration Committee and the co-author with Hubert Humphrey of the Humphrey-Hawkins Full Employment and Balanced Growth Act, Augustus Hawkins of California. Parren Mitchell is chairman of the Small Business Committee of the House. Charlie Rangel, who is a third-ranking member on the Ways and Means Committee. And your own and our beloved Louis Stokes, who chairs the Ethics Committee of the House of Representatives. Give him a hand. And so we are so pleased to be here in Ohio, in the city represented by Lou Stokes, one of our members, and in a state that has a great stake in the resolution of our budget problems this year. I'm pleased that you've asked me here to address the budget question generally and the Congressional Black Caucus constructive alternative budget proposal. Our approach to our budget needs in the country differs from that of the administration, and it is for that reason that we've come up with a different solution. After 21 years as a minister and civil rights activist and 10 years on Capitol Hill, I have learned that if you want to turn people on in this country, talk nonsense. And if you want to turn them off, talk sense. And I am here to say that the Reagan Economic Recovery Program and budget proposals which accompany it, that proposal is based on a lot of nonsense about the problems in our economy and in the world of in the arena of world affairs. In the area of the economy first, the American people are being told a lot of nonsense. They're being told that the reason we have inflation and unemployment and low growth in this country is government. Government spending, we spend too much. Government taxing, we take too much in terms of taxation. And government regulation, we attempt to regulate the lives of Americans too much. Thus, they say, to remedy that situation, the solution is simple. Cut government spending, cut taxation, and deregulate the economy and American life. And they would do this with the most extraordinary attempt by any president in this century to redistribute income with money going from the poor to the rich, while the middle class comes out just about even as a political stratagem. This program would alter incomes by giving tax breaks to the better off, while significantly reducing programs aimed primarily at the poorest people of the country. It would wipe out a generation of programs that were established on the theory that only the federal government can or will aid the neediest members of our society. That nonsensical program is all based on nonsense about how to deal with our nation's domestic economic problems. I call it nonsense because, as the Joint Economic Committee of the House and Senate reported, if we were to balance the budget this year, it would only reduce inflation by but 0.2%. And if we were to provide the rich and the major corporations with all of the tax incentives and tax breaks that are called for by the Reagan administration, it would increase productivity and economic growth in the country by only 0.4%. Now that's nonsense. Common sense tells us that we have rising inflation in the country today and rising unemployment and low economic growth, not because we have too many people on cedar jobs across the nation and in Cleveland in particular, not because we have too many people on Medicaid or on food stamps or too many young people on basic opportunity grants. Were that the case, we would be for cutting those proposals, cutting those programs, if that were the problem. The fact is that the problem in our nation, domestically, is a result of 15 or more years of steady decline in economic performance, in manufacturing output, and in product design in our country. In sector after sector in this economy, we are producing insufficient quantities of poorly designed products at too high a price. And when you do that, not only does the world not buy what you make, but we don't buy what we make. That's our problem. And that problem is best illustrated, I think, by an experience I had a few months ago when my son asked me to get him a portable radio for Christmas. I said, fine, son, I'll go down and get one for you. And I went down to the department store, and I saw on the shelf a portable radio RCA. You know his master's voice? I said, I'm going to get it. The RCA portable radio, AM and FM, $87. And I was just about to reach into my pocket to get my wallet when I looked at another shelf and I saw something that said Sanyo. It said AM, FM, 3 speakers, tape recorder, $47. Now, I want you to know I love America. And I have sense enough, as a member of the Banking, Finance, and Urban Affairs Committee of the House, to know that when I buy American-made products, I am supporting jobs in America. But quite frankly, when I saw something better for less, I'll tell you what I did. I said, Sanyo, and I bought it. And that experience is symptomatic of the problem in our country today. At its rock bottom, the problem is that other people are making better mousetraps nowadays. And until we do something about that situation, we will not have jobs and economic security and economic growth in this country. That is the nature of the problem. The problem is best illustrated by the fact that Americans today are doing what I did. We're buying Datsuns and Toyotas and Kawasaki's and Suzuki's and Yamahas and Hondas and Seiko watches and Nikons and Audis and Volvos, and I could go on to illustrate the fact that we do not have so much a balance of the budget problem as we have a balance of trade problem, as we have a balance of payments problem in the country. And so the solution is not in cutting safe social safety net programs. It's not through putting 1,100,000 more people out of work. The solution is in restructuring our economic system and in this country to foster productivity in areas of the world economy and our national economy where we can remain competitive. And in that struggle, a reduced deficit is important. It has its place, and tax relief and tax incentives have their places. And not only that, but it is tax relief and tax incentive that are aimed at not only capital formation, but also investment in American business and industry, American technology, and American labor. That is the essential need of the country, and not simply to cut so-called social safety net programs. And so, unlike the Reagan administration, with its callous and uneven solution to our economic woes, as reflected in its budget, our proposal moves this administration toward the goal of reduced inflation and full employment, with a compassion for people and a sharing of the burden of the sacrifice required among the rich as well as the poor. And so we call for tax relief. We call for $39 billion worth of tax relief in FY82, but not the kind of tax relief that is indicated in this 10% across the board Kemp-Roth cuts that are being contemplated. The kind of tax relief that favors rich individuals and major corporations and that neglects the need of the least among us as individuals, the poor and lower middle income people of the country, on the one hand, and the need to stimulate economic development and growth among small businesses. Because after all, it is small businesses in this country that employ 90% of the people, and it is among small businesses that we can expect the kind of creativity, the kind of innovation that will enable us to make products that will carry the claim made in America and be bought around the world. You and I know that 10, 20 years ago, when Americans were buying and people around the country and the world were buying made in USA, they did not buy it because they loved Americans any more than we buy Datsuns, Toyotas, Kawasaki's, Suzuki's, or Sanyos because we love Japanese. They bought it because it was the best. And we must somehow, through very careful tax relief and tax incentives on the one hand, and very careful monetary policies on the other, enable our people not only to accumulate the capital for purposes of investment, but also to develop the technology that can make us world competitive in those areas where we may remain world competitive. Now, there are some areas where common sense tells us we need to get out of. The fact is that there's something going on in the world. And one of the things going on in the world is that many of the manufacturing tasks formerly performed by the Western European powers are now being performed more cost efficiently by formerly third world nations. I was flying back from California a few months ago with a salesman in New York who was telling me he was just coming back from South Korea and that he'd made his monthly trip there to purchase some shirts. I said, you fly every month to South Korea? He said, yes, it's cheaper for me to fly to South Korea, buy my shirts, bring them back to New York, put my labels in them, and I can sell them, make more money selling them than I can make selling the ones that the International Ladies Garment Workers Unions makes in New York. That's the nature of our problem. I talked with a lumber manufacturer who was closing down his mill in Oregon, who was lamenting the fact that he had to release 2,000 people without jobs because he told me the Japanese had a technology that enabled them to buy lumber in Oregon, sail it across the sea, make plywood of it, and send it back here and sell it for less than he could make it in Oregon. And so what we must have is a kind of accelerated depreciation, the kind of targeted tax relief that enables us to become competitive in those areas where we can remain competitive. Now, we ought to get out of the textile industry with respect to shirts. Now, you may think the shirt you have on was made here, probably made in South Korea or Taiwan. No point with an across-the-board accelerated depreciation propping up shoe manufacturers in the Northeast United States. Italy has that market sold up. And at some point, we're going to have to decide, as we have decided with some of our foreign competition, if you're going to make them, if you're going to sell them here, make them here. So I don't care if they make Volkswagens here. I don't care, but I'd like to see a few Toyota and Datsun factories here because they go a longer way to empty. You know what I mean? And when they go a longer way to empty, people will buy them. So those are the kinds of creative policies that must be reflected specifically in tax incentive programs such as those which the Congressional Black Caucus has offered as a constructive alternative to the Meade Act's generalized across-the-board policies of this administration. We, for example, under the Reagan proposal for individual tax relief, the average family making $15,000 a year will be paying by 1984 $93 more in federal taxes, while the 0.2% of the people who make $200,000 a year will be getting $20,000 back from the federal government. And we can spread the burden of tax relief a little more evenly than that. We provide $22.7 billion in tax relief. But it is tax relief targeted for those 60% of the American people who pay their income taxes by standard deductions. And so by that means, we not only provide them the ability to retain more cash money for savings, but also to keep up with inflation. We increase, for example, the standard deduction from $2,300 for an individual to $2,800, and from $3,400 for couples to $4,300. We provide a 10% tax credit to handle the increased Social Security payments that low and moderate income people will have to sustain this year. We increase the earned income tax credit from 10% of the first $5,000 with a phase out to $6,000 to $10,000. We increase it to 15% on the first $5,000 with a phase out of between $8,000 and $13,000. This is a more equitable and fair approach to tax reform. In the area of business investment incentives, and we believe that tax incentives must be given to business to recapitalize, to restructure its equipment and its technologies to remain competitive. But we reject that 10-5-3 depreciation schedule which the administration has proposed, which provides depreciation, an arbitrary 10-year depreciation schedule for buildings, and 5 years for heavy machinery, and 3 for trucks and cars. Such a system, in our view, would tend to distort business investment toward heavy machinery at the expense of labor. And by 1986, that plan would call for our losing some $45 billion from the federal treasury, or a little more than 40% of the projected corporate liabilities by 1986. In addition, the provisions for the accelerated depreciation on buildings create too great a bias for channeling capital into new structures as opposed to more productive investment, which are more amenable to small business development, such as upgrading existing structures. We recommend, we recognize the need to provide new incentives to business in order to obtain capital to modernize their plants. And we, therefore, propose a phased-in first-year capital cost recovery system that would allow a business to deduct in the first year the value of a proper stream of economic depreciation over the actual life of the equipment. We propose a 10% tax credit for Social Security taxes paid by employers, many of whom are the small businesses, which are the labor-intensive businesses. Because the Social Security credit is based on wages, it would assist labor-intensive small businesses by contrast to the big major corporations, which this administration's take from the needy, give to the greedy program would benefit. In order to target employment opportunities to those urban and rural areas where we have economic depression, we increase the rehabilitation tax credit to 25% and provide a 25% tax investment credit for new structures. We eliminate the $100,000 limitations on the investment tax credit for used machinery, and increase the wage base as well as the percentage of the credit for any worker who is employed under the targeted jobs credit program from the present $6,000 base to 50% to 65% of the $10,000 base. These measures significantly, in our view, reduce the period it takes for a business to become profitable by reducing both the startup and labor costs. Not only that, but we apply common sense as well to the question of spreading the burden of financial sacrifice among the rich as well as the poor. We spend in our budget $25 billion more than the president would have us to spend by restoring $27 billion in cuts in those social safety net programs. But we come out with a deficit that is $1.5 billion smaller than the Reagan deficit because we bring in $27 billion more in revenues by asking the rich to share some of their tax welfare, some of their public welfare with the country. For example, we think there's something callous and cold about taking $1.5 billion from the child nutrition program, which services some 22 million poor families in this country. And so we say, no, put that $1.5 billion back. And let's ask the rich to share their free lunch program with us. You know, the rich do have a free lunch program. It costs us $3 billion a year. It's called the 3 Martini Lunch. We have not asked that you take all of that. Just give us half of it back. And with that, we can feed the poor children. We look at the food stamp program from which the administration proposes that we take $1.8 billion. And we say, no, let's not do that. Let's put the food stamp program back and ask the multinational corporations that are based here in this country to give up $1.8 billion of their domestic international sales corporation, a deferral. They call those the discs today. They want to take $1.1 billion from the Medicaid program, not the Medicare program, which deals with all Americans, but the Medicaid program targeted for the poor. We say, don't do that. Why not just bring in $1.1 billion by ending the capital gains treatment of ordinary income, which so many very rich people benefit from in this country. They say, let us do away with alternative energy research to the tune of some $1.5 billion. We said, no, don't do that. Let's ask the rich oil companies, which are experiencing a 100% increase in profits and which just benefited from deregulation, ask them to give up a little of their public welfare. It's $2.9 billion in the oil depletion allowance. And so there is a way to reduce spending and a way to reduce our deficit and to provide the necessary incentives to targeted development in areas where we may remain world competitive without placing the entire burden upon the least among us, those who are hurting most as a result of these programs. Ours, therefore, is a common sense budget based on a realistic assessment of what our domestic problems in the country are, and that offers solutions that share the burdens of these difficult times with both the rich and the poor. Let me quickly run on to our differences in terms of common sense and nonsense in the area of international affairs. The administration has gone to great lengths to base its program on a lot of nonsense. It has told the American people that all of our problems in the world are a function of Russian, Soviet expansion, and a scheme that requires that we fashion a military solution that requires a transfer of some $50 billion from the domestic side of the budget to the military side of the budget. A proposal that involves our spending some $2 trillion over the next 5 years on military weaponry and military defense. A solution that has us identifying any interests in the world that are not, quote, loyal to us, because we will match loyalty with loyalty, we are told. Identifying any who are not loyal to us as terrorists to be suppressed by foreign military aid from this country. And you ought to know that military spending is the most inflationary spending that a nation can embark upon. That's why the Japanese and Germans were so happy when we told them, you cannot make arms. Japanese said, we can't make arms? They said, that's right. Said, can we make radios? Said, yeah. Said, can we make television? Yeah. We make automobiles? Said, yeah. Watches? Yeah. Well, you go on, make those arms, and they have taken us to the cleaners, and that's the nature of our problem. And so we say that to suggest that our problems in the world lend themselves to military solutions is nonsense. Common sense tells us that our problems in the world do not lend themselves to military solutions, that they are social, economic, and political in nature, and that they require a foreign policy that emphasizes technical assistance, development aid, and humanitarian relief around the world as our chief weapon against Soviet expansionism. And if anyone needs to be convinced of that fact, he has but to use a little common sense and reflect upon the fact that one little nation in the Middle East held 53 hostages of ours for 444 days, and all of our nuclear submarines slipping around in water around the world, and all of our B-52 bombers waiting to fly overhead, and all of our ICBM missiles siloed around the world couldn't do a thing with the situation because our problems in the world at rock bottom are social, economic, and political, and require social, economic, and political solutions. And so our constructive alternative budget forces a military posture that requires defense of America, but not domination of the world. We spend only $5.1 billion less in FY82 than the Reagan proposal, but we do it by increasing substantially and spending on our military personnel with salary increases that will take military families off of food stamps in the country, and thus free those food stamps to get some of the truly needy fed. We do so by eliminating wasteful spending, like the $105 billion contemplated on spending for an MX missile system that will not only destroy the landscape throughout Middle America, but which, when it's operational, will probably be obsolete in 1990. And so we say strike the MX missile. Our common sense approach says that our foreign initiatives ought to take the form of development aid, for example, to Zimbabwe, so that Mugabe can build some roads from the chromium mines to the sea so we can buy it and bring it to Detroit and Ohio and make some K cars that run a longer way to empty than Datsun. That is the nature of our problem, and that's the nature of the solution that ought to be fashioned. We ought not to be putting guns in the hands of underdeveloped nations and people. We ought to be providing them with technical assistance and development aid that enable them to buy what we make, hopefully, in a fashion that is the best in the world. And so finally, let me say that in positing these common sense, compassionate solutions to the problems that our nation faces here and abroad, we in the caucus realize that we are wading into a veritable firestorm of carefully generated public opinion to the contrary. The kind of firestorm that Senator Metzenbaum encountered when he was among only 10 members of the Senate to oppose the nonsense of a budget that's based on the thesis that the reason we have problems in this country is that we have too many poor mothers who benefit from child care programs, who, when we take the nutrition programs from them and take the daycare centers from them, will be forced to go back on welfare. That's not the problem, we say, but we recognize that in taking that kind of common sense approach to our problems to reindustrialize and reinvest in American ingenuity and American labor, we are encountering a veritable firestorm, hurricane force of public opinion generated on basis of foolishness about what the problems of our nation and our world are. But I say to you in closing that if it is said of no one else in this country, it will be said of the Congressional Black Caucus that we did not fear the weather and that we did not trim our sails, but instead challenged the wind itself in order to improve its direction and to cause it to blow more softly and more kindly over the world and its suffering people. I thank you for this opportunity to share those thoughts with you.
Thank you, Congressman Fauntroy. Today at the City Club, we're listening to Congressman Walter E. Fauntroy, chairman of the Congressional Black Caucus, discussing the president's economic program. In just a moment, we'll turn to our question period, but first some announcements. Right now, as you may know, we are in the middle of our annual membership campaign. This is that time of year when we simply wish to share with all public-minded citizens the opportunity to join us in Cleveland's famous citadel of free speech. During April and May, we are offering membership for the remainder of this membership year through next November for just $25. To date, since the 1st of April, 139 new members have joined. And any of you who are not now members of the City Club are invited to join too. Just $25. Stop by our office or call us at 621-0082 for more information. Today, as always, we have with us students who are participating in our Living Seminars program, which we sponsor in cooperation with the Cleveland Board of Education and with the support of Sohio. Students with us today are from the following high schools: Collingwood, Independence, John Marshall, Maple Heights, Shaker Heights, Erie View Catholic. Will they stand, please, to receive our welcome? Thank you. They will be meeting with Congressman Fauntroy for their own seminar right after our forum here. Next Friday, there will be no forum here in this place, but a delegation of City Clubbers will be in London for a special forum there, featuring the Right Honorable Lord Solmes, Lord President of the Council, Leader of the House of Lords, a top member of Prime Minister Thatcher's cabinet, and son-in-law of Winston Churchill. He'll be delivering an important address to the American people through the City Club, to be broadcast via satellite across the ocean and across our country. Even though we won't have a forum here, you may hear the broadcast at the regular time over WCLV and all the other stations on our nationwide radio network. Now for our questions for Congressman Fauntroy. We have two microphones, one in the front with Ellen Davis, one in the back with Ed Rasmussen. First question, please.
Congressman, you know as 18 of 430 that politics is the art of compromise. With a Republican administration, a Republican Senate, and a Democratic House where there are many conservative Democrats, what can you hopefully expect to happen? Could you give us any predictions what will come out of this session of Congress and the Senate by the fall?
I have both hopes and fears with respect to that question. My hope is that when the Congress goes back to work next Monday, that a sufficient number of Americans would have reached them back home to inform them that the problem in the nation is not us or the bus, but it is a need to revitalize our economy and to put people to work, one. And two, that the people who were going to be most affected by these across-the-board meat-axe cuts are not only going to be the poor and the black, but a broad range of middle-income people who benefit from these services as well. And I'm hopeful as a result of that kind of sober thinking about the impact of these cuts, we will have a situation where there will be three alternatives for consideration by the House, which, when the votes are cast, will probably mean that none will pass, and that the nation will have a little time to carefully assess this extraordinary attempt to shift income from the poor to the richest individuals and corporations that are based in this country.
Congressman, I believe you have some information, and I wish you would share it with us. I have a couple of questions regarding a demonstration that will occur here in Cleveland May 9th, opposing the Reagan budget and supportive of the budget of the Congressional Black Caucus. I would like to make a very brief comment. You're concerned about what you're going to run into, and I think we know there already are at least 10 budget groups in the District of Columbia opposing the Reagan budget. We have a number here in Cleveland, and there are a number of budget coalitions across the country that I believe are going to be on your side, and maybe will make it less painful. And now, one very quick question. I was very pleased to hear you talk about the fact that we've fallen behind because we have not had the research behind our civilian sector. I know that a lot of our research talent for many years has been co-opted by the defense industry. Can you give us some facts about whether the Japanese, German governments do support research for civilian products? What's happening there? There must be some real differences.
Let me say first that on May the 9th, there will be demonstrations all over the nation as a result of the coalition against the budget cuts that has come together across the nation. I'm very pleased to know that in Ohio, that coalition will be at work informing the residents on a congressional district basis of the impact of these cuts. I've been informed, for example, that the amount of money available in Cleveland for job training and development programs under the CEDAR Title II and Title VI programs is going to be cut from $27 million to $13 million, over half of the money available now. When people learn the impact of the $1.8 billion in food stamp cuts and in Medicaid cuts and in the reduced spending on subsidized housing, I think that there will be a groundswell of opposition against these callous cuts. And I want to commend those who are attempting to do that by themselves raising the issues in their districts. On May the 7th, I understand that there will be a large number of people coming to Washington for a day of mourning for the cuts and the many poor people of the nation who will suffer and die as a result of the callousness of these budget proposals. Secondly, with respect to your question on the German and Japanese model, let me simply suggest that one of the reasons that we are being outproduced, both technically and effectively, is that there is serious cooperation between government, business, and labor in Japan and Germany, particularly in Japan, and we must fashion a similar partnership that involves a sharing of the burden of recovery of our economic health in the nation, based not on diminishing the effectiveness necessarily of others who are producing well, but producing best what we can best market around the world. And obviously, with industrial tasks shifting to the formerly underdeveloped nations, we have to think in terms of more management and administrative tasks and information systems that the world will buy if we make them well. I can envision a time when, if we make the proper investment in young people through basic opportunity grants and through our public schools, we will be able to develop the kind of technology that the world will buy information from our satellites as to whether they should plant soybeans or corn on this plot of land, and whether or not, as a result of our weather information, we can project a rainy or a dry season. It's that kind of information that I think the world will buy, and we can fashion that kind of new America with a new place in the economy of the world if we seriously discipline ourselves in terms of government, business, and labor cooperation, and not in terms of a raid upon the Treasury to the tune of some $220 billion by 1986 by the major corporations of this country.
Congressman Fauntroy, what is your opinion of the reports about the president accepting the Jim Jones conservative compromise? And was that one of the three that you referred to earlier? And what are your feelings about the chances of convincing your fellow Democrats not to accept that compromise?
Let me say, first of all, that, again, if you want to turn people on, talk nonsense. Turn them off, talk sense. Now, the fact is that the compromise that the president has announced with Graham Latta is no compromise at all. They want to cut $6 billion more from the safety net programs, and the president is suggesting that I'm compromising. So that's not an alternative. The Jones alternative, if you want to call it that, is not one which is acceptable to us. It does not provide the basic level of spending to tide our people over in our transition from non-productive sectors into productive sectors of the world economy, so that we will begin to buy what we make and the world will begin to buy what we make. It does not make an adequate commitment to CETA. It does not make an adequate commitment to Medicaid, to the public service jobs programs, and certainly it does not make an adequate commitment to the housing industry, which for some reason this administration has decided needs to be closed down. Too much money, I'm told, is tied up in real estate, and that capital needs to be freed to be invested in the cheapest labor you can find anywhere in the world. So that we have rejected the Jones so-called compromise, and we have certainly rejected the Graham Latta retreat from the Reagan insensitivity and insanity and nonsense.
Congressman Fauntroy, last week we watched the British version of the Long Hot Summer. This year, can we expect the homegrown American version of the Long Hot Summer?
I always expect that question, but let me put it this way. If you want a classic illustration of the efficacy of supply-side economics as it is being recommended by this administration, look to England. It's being tried there, and it is flunking royally. And as a result, you may expect not only an increase in the index of social disorder that riots reflect, but we're already seeing an increase in the usual index of social disorder, crime. It's very clear that when people are out of work, whether in Detroit or in the rural communities of our nation, they become not only depressed but self-destructive, and crime rises. So I cannot predict anything but increased criminal activity, social frustration, until and unless we deal with the basic problems confronting us, and that is that of targeting our resources toward the development of a full employment and balanced growth economy, such as the Humphrey-Hawkins bill calls for, and such as this administration is explicitly rejecting, not only with its high interest rate policies, as it is fostering them on the Federal Reserve Board, but also with its failure to target adequately both its budget cuts and its tax relief.
Congressman Fauntroy, this is somewhat of a overall philosophical question, but it seems in recent years there has been a breaking of the ranks within the black community. I'm thinking about the increased adherence to the Republican Party of many black elected officials, the dissenting voices of philosophers such as Thomas Sowell, the turning to international affiliations such as the PLO of some members of the black community. Are these a sign of welcome diversity, or do you feel that the Black Caucus and the people it represents is weaker now than it was 5 years ago?
First of all, let me say that I have not detected any great trend or shift toward Reaganomics as reflected in the Republican administration's policies today among blacks. Now, I have come upon some new names and some new voices who are mouthing the same simplistic nonsense that the administration has foisted upon the American people, so that I do not think that the black emphasis on the basic problems confronting the nation that reflect themselves most acutely in our experience has been altered over recent years. Secondly, I certainly have welcomed the new emphasis on the part of black leadership in particular on the international dimensions of the problems that impact upon the quality of life of our people in this country. So that I do not apologize at all for recommending to the country a foreign assistance package that adds some $300 million to the Agency for International Development to assist in Latin America and South America, in Africa, and in the Caribbean, in developing markets for our products. I do not apologize at all for the increased aid to Zimbabwe, which should enable us not only to stabilize the situation and keep our access to the 50% of the world's natural resources that we require in order to function as an industrial giant here by peaceful means, so that we are certainly concerned about that. Let me say that as one who is the chairman of the board of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the organization founded by Martin Luther King Jr., and the organization which made a dual appeal 2 years ago to both Israel and the PLO to seek peaceful solutions to their conflicts, that it is important that we exercise that kind of moral leadership. As a minister, for example, I am one who feels himself committed to a ministry of reconciliation. And so we did appeal to both the PLO and to Israel to do three things. First, to declare a moratorium on violence, and secondly, to sit down at the peace table, each respecting the right of the other to self-determination and to peace. That appeal, of course, fell on deaf ears and has not been responded to. It does not in any way diminish, however, the appeal that must be made on behalf of peace through nonviolence. Finally, let me say, and I'm glad you gave me the opportunity, although you didn't ask the question, let me say that I am concerned about people of conscience, particularly Christians, who are being misled by right-wing strategists who are white to apply Christian principles to a narrow range of secondary issues while blatantly refusing to apply Christian principles to a broad range of primary issues. So that as a Christian, I am concerned about the right to life, and I want to see the fetus become a child. But once it gets here, I am under obligation as a Christian to declare good news to it. And there are people who are being led to say if they're poor, don't give them food stamps. If their parents are indigent, don't give them aid to families with dependent children. If they need jobs, don't give them cedar trade and give them a job, give them a gun to go over and fight in the Middle East for the Exxon flag. I mean the U.S. flag. In short, I think it's time for people of conscience to speak up and to say to those who are being misled into violence, opposing the SALT Treaty and advocating arms buildups, to say to them, in the words of the Master, beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing. We want to pray in the schools, and yet are they ravenous wolves in their hearts. If I were the psalmist, I'd say the words of their mouths are softer than oil, but war is in their hearts. Their tongues are smoother than butter, and yet are they drawn swords. And if I were the Apostle Paul speaking to the conservative church at Rome, as well as the Jerry Falwell, I'd say, for I bear you record that you have the zeal for God, but not according to knowledge, for you being ignorant of God's righteousness, and going about to establish your own righteousness, have not submitted yourselves unto the righteousness of God. There will be no peace in America or in the world, in the Middle East, or in South America, or in South Africa, until there is justice for human beings, and that ought to be the high moral standards on basis of which we fashion our foreign and domestic policy, and that's what the Congressional Black Caucus constructive alternative budget is all about.
You sure?
Got 2 minutes. I'll
Okay.
flash through this one.
Very quickly, 2 weeks ago, Dr. Helen Caldecott addressed this group about the dangers of nuclear proliferation in terms of what the United States as well as the rest of the world would face if we did have an all-out nuclear war. The Reagan administration has committed itself to nuclear buildup in terms of peacetime installations for energy use. We all know that that sort of nuclear installation also intimates military nuclear technology. What does your budget have to say about the uses of energy in terms of alternative form, geothermal, solar, wind, and wave?
We have restored some $300 million, which the Reagan administration cut from research and development for alternative sources of energy, including the ones that you've mentioned. And again, it's consistent with our effort to focus our resources on peaceful uses of energy, peaceful uses of space, peaceful uses of people, and away from the insane militarization that is now underway in the world. You ought to know that the world spends $450 billion a year on weaponry, and only 25% of that amount on development aid to anybody in the world at a time when we have increasing starvation and refugee situations around the world, particularly in Africa, where we're not spending enough on the subject.
Thank you very much, Congressman Fauntroy. Today at the City Club, we have been listening to Congressman Walter E. Fauntroy, chairman of the Congressional Black Caucus. We thank you all for being with us. The City Club Forum is adjourned.